Vivid, he wanted to squeeze his head until the memory was erased. He scanned the small bedroom, shuddering. Real. This was real. A truth scarier than the nightmare itself. A night breeze flowed through the open window, drying the sweat on his back. The tiny opening to the outside world was the only gift in his 8x8 living space. Twin bed, white walls, stained beige carpet. It all reflected the stale place he'd tumbled into. But living in a halfway house with 3 other men was a lot better than a jail cell. And truthfully, it was a miracle he hadn't ended up in one. Chad picked up the purple sobriety chip on his nightstand and rubbed his finger over the 8. Then the words, unity, service, and recovery. For some, 8 months might seem small, unimportant. But for him, it was the longest he'd ever gone without a drink. Laila would be proud of him, if he had the courage to tell her. That was the problem with sobriety sometimes. There was no more lying to yourself, no more excuses. He'd ruined the only truly beautiful thing in his life. Easing off the bed, Chad stretched his aching back and checked the time. 5:12 a.m. Trying to go back to sleep would be pointless. His shift at the hardware store started at 7. The job he'd held for a full 5 months wasn't glamorous, but he took pride in every haul. Cutting and stacking lumber had put weight back on his frame and color back in his face. Gone were the hollow cheeks, the sickly thinness, and the deep black circles under his eyes. In the mirror, Chad almost looked like the man he used to be. The man he swore he'd be again when he entered rehab 8 months ago after learning Katie had returned to Fairfield. It was his 4th attempt, and the only time he really believed it would work. If Katie could get clean, then somehow he'd find the strength to do it as well. Setting the chip back on the counter, Chad shook away the lingering nightmare. He had to focus on the future, on Laila and staying clean. She was still waiting for him. Joe had practically promised as much when they'd talked on New Year's, and when Chad finally went home, he'd make sure her wait was not in vain. A blue haze of the coming sunrise filtered through the living room blinds as he quietly stepped over shoes and discarded laundry to get to the kitchen. Mark had called a house meeting for tonight, and Chad had a pretty good idea that household maintenance was on the list of topics. None of them were especially tidy, himself included. 2 post-it notes appeared when he flicked on the kitchen light, one on the fridge scolding them for drinking the rest of the milk, and the other on the stack of unwashed dishes that said, "Wash me or I will kill you." Chad shook his head, but welcomed the unexpected smile. Mark was a softy, soft enough to take in 3 recovering alcoholics and mentor all of them, so his threats fell short of their target. Chad had met Mark in rehab during one of the group sessions. He was their success story, a man who'd walked along the cliff with 1 foot dangling over the abyss, yet found a way not to tumble to his death. Mark was a 19-year alcoholic, 4 of those sober. He understood loss, understood temptation, and understood Chad's journey through years of alcoholism and drug use. He understood that though the drugs had been Chad's final undoing in Fairfield, it was the alcohol that obliterated him time and time again. Chad had spent most of his adult life blaming his father for the affliction. But Mark had shown him that he was the only one responsible for his actions. He'd chosen to hide inside a bottle, and years later he was living out the consequences of that choice. Pushing away the lump in his throat, Chad rolled up the note, tossed it into the nearly full trash can, and spent the next 15 minutes quietly unloading and reloading the dishwasher. It was a job he knew well, one of the few Laila had trained him to do after they'd moved in together. His hand froze on its way to grab another dish, the memory as vivid as the nightmare had been. "You're doing it all wrong?" Laila says, hopping off the counter. I pretend to be offended, but I'm not. There's not much she could ever do to offend me. Didn't anyone ever tell you that if you discourage a man from doing dishes, he'll never help again? What good is your help if none of the dishes come clean? She's